Hello, my name is Andrew Gould, and welcome to the second episode of the Unionist Central Podcast. Today we are joined by Jude Eskandar, who will join us in a discussion on technology, automation, and their place in the future. Jude, what's your take on the topic?
I think automation is very useful, but only for certain things. Like straight up manual labor jobs that take a lot of time normally for regular humans are shown to reduce lifespan if done for a long enough time due to like things like inhaling smoke or just enough rigorous labor that it's damaging permanently to the body. So things like that, like construction and other similar activities, should be left to automation because it's just a throwaway of human life and power, if that makes sense. However, it also obviously can't be used for everything because that would shift the economy by a lot. Yeah, everyone has to have a job. It's just things like, doctors and people in the government and things like entrepreneurships, or businesses more like they need somebody who they need a human basically. You can't have a robot leading any of those because that's what makes humans human is the ability to do that, to start something like that, or to lead a group of people.
I'd agree. I'd say we wouldn't want robots or things to automate that because that's something that kind of gives us a purpose. Although I would say you could also find purpose in other things. I also think as long as you're content with your job and you're happy with it, you do find purpose from it. I think the issue becomes when people are forced into these jobs that they don't want to be in and that they don't find content from. So, for example, and I use the word forced there intentionally. I think maybe you could say that they're not forced by an object or a person. Like, there's nobody saying you have to take those jobs. But by circumstances, they wind up having to take those jobs. They're being placed into those jobs. So, like, the issue becomes when, like, you're talking about, like, the manual labor that is not necessarily good for human health. It's actually bad for doing all that stuff. Um, Someone does have to do it. There's always going to be someone who has to clean the sewers or chop down lumber, do like construction work and stuff like that, these more dangerous jobs. Someone always has to do these jobs. And I think it would be best if they were automated because it would be better if people were able to pursue jobs that make them more content and make them feel better and give them more purpose rather than these jobs that they're doing just to get by. I think that when it comes to automation, the main concern would be if it's being used incorrectly. So, if it's replacing jobs and people aren't going on to do other things. So, if you do work in construction or you do take out trash, you do some of these more grimy jobs, and your job gets automated, I think the issue would become if you're not given another job.
That's a pretty good take. It's kind of guess it should be like built around the human needs and wants, like what we as humans can do and enjoy, or like to a relative point. Like it's not something you would go out of your way to do a job that is. But it is something that you're like fine with doing or happy with doing to some degree, as opposed to something you just despise, but you need to do it or else everyone needs money, everyone has to get it somehow. It's just the way it is in America, at least. So I think it has to be shaped around like eventually getting everyone to a spot where they like relatively enjoy their job, and then replacing all these other jobs that need to be done. Somebody needs to do all these things, but if robots could do them, or automation, AI, and things like that could take care of those, it would leave the rest of humanity free to pursue other choices.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that that's more beneficial. That's what we want to head towards, a society in which you're doing a job more because you like and enjoy doing the job and you want to do the job, at least relatively, versus you have to do the job to make money. The main concern for me would be if that doesn't take place. So this is what I was talking about a bit before, but I think we're at a path here where you could wind up where people are placed into jobs that they want to be in rather than jobs that they don't want to be in, right? And things work out better. I think you can even have the decreasing need for jobs. I think there will always still be need for human activity, like within the government or within management, stuff like that. I think we wouldn't want to automate that just because I think that's something that we need interaction with. But I also think that as we go forward, the main threat would be if we automate jobs and they're not filled in. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we in the society we have right now, we do have, at least in America, we have some issues with corporations having too much power. Individuals at the top of these corporations having too much power, and they misuse this power. I think an issue could arise where the only force that stops them from going too far, in my opinion at least, is the people. It's that they do have to deal with these like labor laws, and they have to be accountable to the people and the environment they live in. And I think the issue could become if you take away the people's power. For example, I don't think I don't think robots can unionize, right? So that kind of becomes an issue where that's a path for companies to not have to deal with that if they just replace the jobs with automation. And the issue arises, in my opinion, if you have a weak government. So if the government doesn't step in and help out the people and try and solve those issues, I think that that's where it arises from.
I agree. I feel like it would take some of like the human aspects that make some things difficult away. You know, it would make, you know, I guess it's hard to put this into words, but just make life smoother. Like there's zero room for error. I mean, obviously, assuming that the AI is complete, right, and that it is perfect as it should be, then there's not really room for error. And like, yeah, say you have like a human and an AI perform the exact same task like 1,000 times. The human's gonna screw it up inevitably at some point. The AI will not, right? So it's just like there's a lot less room for error. Also, in terms of like efficiency, like when you're building something, you have to have people spend time on it, go to sleep and rest, and they come back, spend more time on it, and weekends off. But with robots, they can just work 24/7 as long as the coding is complete. So, in terms of efficiency and like I guess ease of life or what quality of life, it's a lot better.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think an interesting story about that would be the story of Deep Blue, which was that, for people who don't know, is that AI, who in 1997 beat Gary, probably going to butcher this, but Gary Kasparov, who was a chess. And I think that kind of proves that, at least with anything that has some sort of pattern that you could work out, AI is going to be able to do it better because it has more time to calculate. So for a human that takes all this time, and AI could do relatively instantly. Of course, not actually instantly, but to our perception, it seems like a computer could do things instantly. And I think that makes it so there's going to be less error where it can take a human can be indecisive about something. Like, let's say you're having issues like for cutting down trees. That's lumberjacks. It's a very dangerous job because it's difficult. I think as we automate that, or like truckers, actually, truckers is a better example. As we automate that, I think that they don't need to sleep. It can be safely done. I think that's overall a good thing. I don't think that's something we should fear. I think that's progress. The main issue becomes if those truckers then don't have a job. I guess what I'm trying to say is the issue to me becomes if the people who are losing their jobs to automation aren't given new jobs and aren't taken care of. I think you could have issues arise where companies are basically able to say, you won't meet our certain demands. We're going to have to automate your jobs, and we're going because automation doesn't complain. And I think the only way you can really solve that. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't automate. I think some people have it wrong about that. They say, "Oh, that's the reason we shouldn't automate." No, I think that we should still automate. I just think that's a reason why you need to have more of not necessarily a stronger government, but a government that is, because now the government has to protect people in a new way. They have to protect them and make sure that they're being taken care of after automation. And I think that the current world we live in requires everybody to have a job. And if you don't have a job, you're going to starve to death. And I don't think that system will work, or at least it won't work well if automation does take place.
Yeah. This is like gonna start sounding like a little like it has zero relevance, but like now I'm gonna start talking about religion here. So the Abrahamic religions, that is to say that, you know, they were like first created, I guess, in Europe, and then things like Hinduism and Buddhism were in Asia. And there's stark differences in these religions. Some are Buddhism and Hinduism like are a lot about peace, and then you have the Abrahamic ones, which are a little more tend to be a little more violent, you know. Um, and they say this is because where the Europeans would live and they settled, their ground was like really rocky, so it was hard to grow plants. They had to work very hard for a living, which is just the way it was, you know. And in Asia, over where that was happening, the soil was like it was fine. They, you know, they could plant stuff and they could have a rather easy life where they had more time to think. And this is like kind of where it connects is like if people had an easier life where they had a lot more time to think than just being constantly pressed into just kind of monotonous labor or whatever the job may be. If they had a life to obviously it's not a job of course, but like the free time of mind, a lot more human minds at work could be more helpful than like human hands, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I think that a large, like, it actually, I think that just makes sense from a pure, like, statistical standpoint. Not to, I don't break people down to just numbers, but if you think about it, we spend a lot of time and effort educating the entire populace. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But I also think that a lot of effort goes into educating people, and then they just get used for their manual abilities. And I think it would be better off, the entirety of humanity would be better served if people used more of their intellect, and their brains going forward. I also like your analogy about the Abrahamic religions. I think that also is a place where, because of the way Europe was set up, and like you were saying, there was also a lot more fighting. And this isn't to say that there wasn't fighting in Asia, there definitely was. But I think you also tend to see longer periods of peace in Asia. uh, Sorry, that's why you try to see like a larger population in Asia, because there's not that natural death as much. Oh, sorry, I'm not. There's not as much of that natural death there, because usually you could have one centralized leadership. So like basically that's why like China, Russia both expanded into Asia and are so big, because there wasn't any natural obstructions to them. Whereas like in Europe, you see very rarely big empires arise that control all of the European continent, because it's very hard to do. There's a lot of natural obstructions. And the point I'm trying to make by that is just that you tend to see these areas who are living under more stability, and people who don't have to do that. People who are living under more stability tend to have a more stable region. And I think that one of the issues that arises in our modern world is people are discontent with their lives, and they're not happy with how things are, and they look at it and they're disgruntled. And that's why we have a lot of violence, because people are upset with how life has turned out for them, and they take out that anger on other things.
Yeah, just like I think in the future, assuming that the world becomes pro automation, or to some degree maybe just America, but in the future, the idea is that like the in terms of what's more valuable, the human mind is more valuable than the human hand, or what? Then like I guess the human hands, if that makes sense. Like what the brain can accomplish is a lot more meaningful than like what you can accomplish like literally physically with your own hands, like lifting things and stuff like that. Is that the human mind is obviously a lot more valuable, and with automation that would really bring that to light.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that, for example, this is why you see farming has decreased drastically. Well, not why, but I think that's a sign of it. Where in not the older days, but in the past, it doesn't, like, philosophers, for example. Great, you can think through stuff, and you can work through stuff in your mind. You could try and solve these philosophical quandaries, but how's that going to help you to eat when you're still trying to get food? That matters a lot less, and it was very much something for like only the rich to deal with when you have the ability to do that. I think as we go forward, the only way we're going to ever get to what people see as like utopia or whatever is through automation, where people have more rest time, and personal time to basically think about stuff like that and try and find deeper meaning. And I think that's how you get more content than simply. I think that you can find content like through. We're talking about like happiness. I think you could find that through manual labor. I just think that it's less helpful to our society. So like you could be happy with just getting up and chopping logs each day. That just as an example, you could be happy with that. But I think that contributes very little to our society, even none at all. Whereas I think if you find something that you could find meaning in, but also contributes greater, and you have more people doing things like that, I think that's how we progress. And I think that would be much better for everyone. Okay, I think this is a good spot to wrap this up. And I think as a closing remark, I just want to say that when it comes down to it, I see automation as good in the world, as beneficial to humanity. I think as long as it is used correctly and responsibly, and with supervision, I'd suggest from the governing body to make sure that people are being taken care of, and that a rich group of oligarchs, my greatest fear would be that a group of oligarchs would take control of the system, which is why I don't think this would work under the current capitalist system. I think that would end up failing. It would be worse, so I wouldn't want it in the current capitalist system, but I think as we transition, it would be better. I do think that automation is the future because it allows us to focus on different things, use more intellectual power, and honestly, in my opinion, enjoy life more because you're not focused and you're not tied down with, again, these dangerous and monotonous jobs. I think that the future is looking good for humanity, and I think that you see these on like sci-fi shows or whatever, like Star Trek, for example. You see this futuristic society. I think that the only way we're ever going to get there is through automation, where you can take these jobs like the garbage man or like lumberjack, stuff like that, or truck driver, and or even like other jobs. I honestly think that allowing people to find jobs that they actually want to do is good for humanity. That'll be much better. I mean, I think you'll increase output because people will be more interested. And I think the only real way to do that is it's through automation. So thanks for joining us today, Jude Eskandar. This has been the Unionist Central Podcast. Andrew Gould signing off.